A group of UK doctors and scientists have asked AstraZeneca to release data detailing their research in advance of the rollout of their COVID vaccine. The move by the Heart team comes after the release of Pfizer data in the US following Freedom of Information requests. Paediatrician Dr. Rosamund Jones, one of the signatories of the UK request for the information, joins me now. Hi, Ros.
Hi, hello.
What specifically happened in the US in relation to the release of data?
Well, they had a group who'd set up right from the beginning looking for transparency. And they put in a bid through, they have a similar freedom of information system that we have, but it was turned down by the FDA on the grounds that, it wasn't of public importance, all sorts of extraordinary replies that they wouldn't do it. And in the end, they went to court. They got an injunction to get the data. The FDA then were wriggling and saying, well, they would produce the data, but it would be in 75 years, which isn't kind of much use. And so in the end, they had to give it all out over a period of 8 months. And all that information's come. But we've got no comparable information in the UK for what the MHRA here knew about AstraZeneca. We want the raw data. We want to know what information they had before they decided to roll it out here, and also what safety surveillance they were doing. Why, for example, when countries in Scandinavia were saying this is causing serious life-threatening or actually fatal blood clotting in people, we were still being told, oh, no, don't worry, it's absolutely safe. It was almost told that when France and Germany and all those countries said they wouldn't use it, that this was because they hated the Brits, it was a British drug, and they were because of Brexit. It was sort of ludicrous. And we had given, millions of doses before actually they agreed here it shouldn't be given to anybody under 50.
What proportion of British people who took a vaccine at all would have been given AstraZeneca? I mean, was it the preeminent?
Yes,
Was it the dominant vaccine?
Yes, it was. And if you look at the vaccine injuries, more are AstraZeneca than Pfizer. So when it comes to the people who have recently been had the first compensation payments, they have all been partners of people who have died from blood clots from AstraZeneca, like Lisa Shaw, BBC, for example. And just to be clear, I think a lot of people think there's a fundamental difference between the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and talk of mRNA and the lipid nanoparticle and all that, and what came out of Oxford with AstraZeneca. But how different are they in terms of as vaccines? Yes, I think they've quietly let people believe that. I mean, I think, I at the beginning was saying, I don't want mRNA, very novel technology, never have any experience of that at all, assuming that the Oxford one would be using standard Oxford technology because they've got a long track record going back, 30, 40 years of doing vaccines. But then when obviously it came, it was apparent that it was DNA as opposed to RNA, so still a genetic tool. And it's simply the way it gets into the cells. It's linked to a harmless viral vector rather than this lipid nanoparticle. And
is some of your interest, is your interest in obtaining this data and having a better look at it, is it because the AstraZeneca vaccine, it would appear, has been effectively withdrawn, hasn't it? No one's being given it.
Yes, it's very weird. If you look on the government website now to see what, if you're called for your booster and you want to look, it just says AstraZeneca currently unavailable. There's nothing to say why it's unavailable, why it's been dropped. And actually, if there's the evidence that it's much more dangerous than Pfizer is non-existent. I you feel as if Pfizer froze them out of the market. I don't quite know how that happened. And my interest in all this started because I'm a retired paediatrician, as you said, and this started back in February 2021 when I saw Oxford University advertising on the 6 o'clock news. I mean, that's the region where I worked. And they were advertising for children to join a trial when there was no adult safety data. And, as a paediatrician, I've done quite a lot of research, and it is really difficult to get any drug trials past an ethics committee. You have to show that the thing you're treating is common in children and isn't common in adults, and you have to do the studies on children. Otherwise,
presumably dangerous to those children.
You always have to go for adults first, and you can only go on to children after you've really demonstrated that this is totally safe in adults. Then you might think, OK, if kids get the same disease, maybe we'll test it now on children. But I wrote straight away to Andrew Pollard, who I'd known professionally. And I was quite surprised. I got an email back within the hour effectively agreeing that he didn't know it was safe, and that's why they were doing the study. This is completely against international law, to do any research.
In order to find out if it was safe or not, they were going to trial it on children.
Yeah. And the irony of it was, of course, the trial had to be dropped because it was... And at the time he said to me, don't worry, it's just a very small pilot study, and if it looks good, then we'll do a proper, fully-sized study. This won't be rolled out to children within the next year. No way, he goes, But it was only 4 months after that they were authorising Pfizer for children. But meanwhile, of course, the AstraZeneca got dropped for all the under-50s. So they had to stop recruiting to the children's trial. He must have known that was coming.
In terms of these freedom of information applications made in America for Pfizer, now you've made one for AstraZeneca here in the UK, is that in the normal run of things? Does it take a bit of struggle to get the kind of data in these circumstances? Looking back at analogous events in history. Or would you just expect to say, can I have it, and you just be given it?
No, I think they will. I'm sure they'll dig their heels in. They'll try and avoid giving it as much as they can. We've already, for example, I was part of a judicial review to try and stop the rollout of vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds. And one of the things we produced was data, that was with Dr. Claire Craig, and she'd done some analysis looking at the excess mortality in 15 to 19-year-old males, showing that it was increasing after the start of the vaccination for that age group. And we got as far as ONS agreeing that it was a statistically significant rise, but they still wouldn't investigate it themselves because they said there wasn't enough data. They were waiting for a bigger signal. How many more children had to die before they would investigate it? But they wouldn't give us the data because they said it would be, the word they used was disclosive. And we weren't asking for the children's names and addresses. What we were asking for, there were, 400 deaths when there should have been 300, let's say. And we wanted to know, basically, it could have been just the month they died and whether they were vaccinated and how many days interval between vaccination and death. So it wouldn't have been disclosive in any way, but they wouldn't give us the data. And I'm sure they'll do the same here.
Laura, it's bizarre testimony to my ears listening to this. How do you react to what Rose is saying?
I think that, if there is any link between the vaccine and adverse events, then I think at this stage the government will fight like weasels in a bag not to release it. But in fact, transparent release and sharing of data would be the best way to either calm fears, because, we hear a lot about how anti-vax sentiment is dangerous overall to public health. So the best way to quell that would be transparency. So that's my first thought. Secondly, I think that releasing just a few hundred child deaths data could be disclosive because it would be not beyond the realms of possibility for an investigative journalist to find where those children were and then maybe turn up at the parents' house where they vaccinated or not. It's a bit of a fine line, but over time there should be transparency about it. The other thing that I do wonder, because the MHRA itself attracts fees from pharmaceutical companies. That's part of its funding model. But do you think the fact that it's had £3 million of Gates Foundation funding over a few years, do you think that kind of funding compromises our access to data and the credibility of the agency, or am I reading too much into that?
Well, no, I would have to say I would share your concerns. I think that's one of the things that to me has been a total eye-opener in the last 2.5 years. I think I naively thought that the MHRA was a, quango paid for by taxpayers. And in my own professional life, I have trusted advice I've had from the NHS, the regulators, and assumed that if they said something was safe, it was safe. Now, in this occasion, I've had reason to dig a lot, and the amount of literature out there around the poor safety record of this vaccine is enormous. And yet they're still saying it is safe and effective, and that's all we ever get. And you're quite right. We've never said we think these deaths are due to the vaccine. But, you know, at the moment, if you take away that small group of 15 to 19s, for the reasons you say, but the large number we're saying, you know, of excess all-cause mortality is now higher in 2022 than it was in 2020, which was the year of this horrendous pandemic. And nobody's investigating. And surely, you know, it's important, because either it is the vaccine, in which case that would be quite quick and easy to say, let's stop this, or if it isn't the vaccine, what is it? Surely it's a huge public health concern. You know, they don't know, is it because lockdowns led to build-up of cancer waiting? But that doesn't fit with what I'm hearing.
Transparency is the answer.
And it's absent from the media, isn't it?
Oh, completely,
You know,
yes.
We've been covering it on this channel,
Yes.
but elsewhere, there's just a deafening silence.
There's been something in the Telegraph, a couple of articles by Sarah Napton, in which she's looked at the overall excess deaths. And they've discussed a few options, but the mention of vaccines isn't in the options. And it's the same with, you look at the Scottish neonatal deaths. The chairman, I think she's going to be the new president of the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, has said that they're not looking at vaccines because there's no plausible mechanism.
It's insane, isn't it? You know, we keep hearing the science is settled. I mean, I've been talking about this with the governor of the Bank of England. He said the science is settled. Printing money does not create inflation. Yes, it does, actually, as it happens. But, you know, when we keep hearing the science is settled, we know that it isn't. I mean, as you say, there are huge questions, but nobody's willing to answer them. And certainly, if you suggest any article about this to any of the media, as you say, apart from maybe one or two, the odd thing here and there, a complete blank. They don't want to know.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you can't settle science over a totally new product. You have to have an open mind. We've had vaccines that were rushed to market in the past. I mean, you take pandemics after the swine flu, and, you know, that got rolled out widely before. Again, it was the Scandinavians, not us. It was Finland who first noticed brain injury in children for that. And by the time it got withdrawn here, still GlaxoSmithKline never wanted to give all their original data for us to know what was known prior to it being discontinued.
Going to have to leave it there, Ros Jones. Thank you very much for coming in and
Pleasure.
illuminating us. Hope that you'll keep us up to date with how that request for information goes.
I'll let you know.
We have contacted AstraZeneca and asked them for the response to the Freedom of Information request. Unfortunately, they have not got back to us with anything at all.